from Microsoft Education team, and I'm thrilled today that I have with me both Aidan Ermy from the New Signature team, and we really appreciate the opportunity to partner with New Signature for this webcast, and also my colleague Greg Milligan from the Canadian Education team, where we both cover technology for education, and this specific set of webcasts really spans the gamut of what our strategy is around cloud and education. So for the session, what we'll do is have you folks on mute as we're doing the presentation, and our goal is for about 45 minutes for the presentation materials. If you do have questions, there is a Q&A panel. As Lindsay helpfully notes, there's a presentation tab at the bottom of the screen and a Q&A tab. If you aren't seeing the presentation, click on the presentation tab and you'll see it. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to post them to the Q&A. If we can take them and answer them, we will do so. Otherwise, what we'll do is hold them at the end of this session, where we'll have a more open Q&A. And certainly, if anybody can't hear or is having any trouble with the session, we'll post this to the Q&A that you should be hearing my audio. And if there's any issues with that, please let us know. We'll be making the recording of this session available along with the content and the presentation materials. So with that, let me thank you for taking time to do this, and let me hand it over to Greg Milligan just to take us through a little bit of background on operations management and really the philosophy around operations management from Microsoft. So Greg, over to you.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. So my name is Greg Milligan. I'm the National Technology Strategist for Microsoft Education, for those that I don't know. Karen and I are both based in Ontario, but we have the fun of handling the whole country. So I'm actually coming to you from sunny Vancouver this morning, where I'm here for the BC Net conference. And so today we wanted to spend time, Microsoft Operations Management Suite. The Microsoft Operations Management Suite is a software as a service. It's a cloud-based offering that we've got, and it is continually evolving and has an awful lot of function associated with it, which is why we decided to split this into two different webcasts. So today we're going to talk about backup, disaster recovery, and things like that. And then there's an entire piece around operational insights or log management, and trying to figure out what the heck's going on in your environment through the use of some smart software, and we'll cover that one in another webcast. So today we're going to focus really on the disaster and backup elements of Operations Management Suite. And so, you know, I've had the pleasure of running across the country and meeting with universities, colleges, and school districts, from the biggest to the smallest. And I'd say even for the largest of our customers in the education space, there is, there's still too much to do, and not enough, time in the day or resources available to fully do things related to automation, in terms of standardizing things, in terms of being able to cookie cutter configurations, have a seamless backup and off-site low-cost backup and disaster recovery that you test on a regular basis, et cetera. And so if you're a mid-sized school district or college and you think, oh, those, the University of Toronto must have, the funding and the time and the resources to do this sort of stuff, they don't either. And so when I look at OMS, I see it as a great fit in the education space. And part of the reasoning for us building OMS as software as a service is that for those customers that started down the path of System Center, and I think about in education an awful lot of customers that have done Operations Manager. So System Center Operations Manager, or SCOM as it's lovingly called, is a great tool for managing your environment, for looking at workloads, especially Microsoft workloads, Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, Lync, or Skype for Business now, file servers, DHCP, DNS, all these sorts of things have management packs. And so you kind of know what's normal and what's not. What we've kind of discovered, though, is we hand that to you as a big box of Lego and say, all right, you figure out how to install all these management packs. You figure out how to set up all of the management infrastructure, and then how you want to tweak and tune your dashboard. And then this will be a useful tool for you. And some folks have done that, but it's certainly in the education space. Those are not, it's not that common to have an amazing dashboard that you use every day based on SCOM data. And so when you think about being able to take all of that, and instead of saying, here's a box of Lego, build all this yourself, instead if we were to say, look, we're going to run this as a service, and all you need to do is point your log files to it, or point your environment at it, and let us take care of standing up all of that management infrastructure. That's really where we're going with Operations Management Suite. And so if you look at the kind of the evolution of it, I get this question a lot. Kind of how does OMS, or Operations Management Suite, compare to System Center? And I just look at it as an evolution. We started really with SMS in the desktop, SMS 1.0, which everyone remembers lovingly. SMS 2 got much better, and then we got into server, managing servers with MOM, Microsoft Operations Manager, and then rolled it into the entire suite with being able to do virtualization, being able to do VMM or Virtual Machine Manager, and turn System Center into a suite. The next evolution of that, especially when you start thinking about hybrid, because the workload that I'm running on behalf of the college or the university or the school district likely involves some things on-prem. My student information system runs on-prem. My HR system runs on-prem. But my mail system, I've gone Office 365 for some users, and I'm on-prem for others. Maybe I'm doing some things with Amazon. Maybe I'm starting to do some things in Azure. So now the environment that I'm managing is hybrid. It's on-prem and cloud. And so we think about taking systems management into the cloud as well. And so I think of as OMS really as that cloud evolution of System Center. It is because it's cloud-based, it is very heterogeneous and open. Like I mentioned, Amazon, we're doing a lot of things around Google. We're doing an awful lot of things around Linux patching and all those sorts of things. And we just have to. If we're a public cloud player and we're competing with Amazon as the two big public cloud players for infrastructure and platform as a service, we have to be absolutely multi-platform. And you've probably noticed that just in general about Microsoft. We are becoming much more, the world is not all about Windows. That's really over the last couple of years. So I see that as a good thing. The way that Operations Management Suite is delivered is there's different solutions that can be added into your tenant. So one thing to keep in mind with OMS, yes, it's software as a service, but it's a tenant that's specific for each customer. So we're not aggregating, your log data and, your backup environment with somebody else's. It's your own tenant. But I really like the way that this works, and Aidan will show you the way that solutions kind of get plugged in. And so all these solutions are available to you in your OMS tenant, and you decide when you want to turn them on and off, and you'll even see them in preview so you can get an idea how you want to play with them, etc. And the ones that exist right now, the first is really the log analytics, which we'll get into on Friday. And that one I find fascinating. I was having this conversation last night over beer with a colleague just about kind of where we're going with a computer's ability to reason over big data and look at patterns and be able to come back and say, here's what's going on. And so that's where an awful lot of the log analytics piece comes in. It's how do I tie all of these different things together and come back to you and say, hey, here's what's really happening. Whether it's a security threat or whether it's a performance issue or et cetera. And so that's the log analytics piece. There's a whole lot around what we call desire state configuration and the workflow associated with it. So being able to do workflow across hybrid. So I've got on-prem and I've got cloud, and I want to be able to do some sort of automation across those. But I also want to be able to do desired state config. And so that is, if you've ever listened to Jeffrey Snover, he is the father of PowerShell, and he's a technical fellow at Microsoft. If you haven't listened to him, go check out Channel 9 and do a search for Jeffrey Snover. He's entertaining and brilliant all at the same time. And he talks about we need to learn to treat our servers like cattle, not like cats. And so that servers need to come out of a standard config. If they drift from that config, we have to know about it and be able to remediate that. If a server starts to misbehave, we try to fix it for a very short period of time, and then we shoot the server, and then we create a new server. And so we don't pet them and love them and call them names. We just shoot them and start a new one. And so I'm sure probably not necessarily something that PETA wants to hear, but we think about servers as cattle, not cats. And DSC is a big chunk of that. So that's another entire area. The third, which we'll talk about today, which is really protecting and extending your data center. This is not technology that OMS brings by itself. I mean, what OMS does is helps you automate and manage the Azure Backup, Azure Disaster Recovery tools. And that's what Aidan will get into. So it's not like OMS came along and said, hey, let's create a new way to do backups. No, Azure has. We have Azure Backup, and it works beautifully for a number of different things. If you're still using tape, please consider this as a way to save money. But OMS automates that front end and gives you better monitoring of it, which is great. The fourth one I find fascinating too, which is really around security and compliance. And we're doing an awful lot here, including some things with hardware firewalls, and as well as really kind of crawling through your environment. So this is something, if you're a Microsoft Premier customer and you've got a Premier support agreement, which we've probably got about almost 30 customers in Canada, some of the bigger universities and school districts and colleges have a support contract with Microsoft. And they're not cheap, but they get an awful lot of value, especially on the proactive side of support, where a support engineer can come on site and do an assessment of your Active Directory or your SQL environment or your Exchange environment, and come back and say, from a security posture, here's where you've got some exposures. We've taken some of those best practices and learnings and turned them into software, and that's what the security and compliance solution will use to come back and say, when I look at your environment, here's some things you might want to address. And so that's the security and compliance piece. And then there are more ones to come. We're working next on some Linux patching things. The OMS team is being very public and around a roadmap, as well as taking feedback. Because it's software as a service. Sorry, I'm getting a little excited. Maybe my coffee was a little strong this morning. When we think about the traditional way of delivering this, we would gather requirements and say, for the next version of System Center. Well, 2016 is almost done. So, okay, so System Center 2019, we'll gather requirements and, we'll build them, and then we'll test them, and then 3 years later you'll see it. And so if you had a real requirement around, whether it's Linux patching or, whatever it is, you're waiting until we build it and test it and put it into a product, which you can then buy and figure out how to upgrade your existing environment to. Here we've gone to software as a service, so it's a lot like Office 365. We, update the service once a month or so, and so we're able to deliver those features much quicker. And because we deliver them as solutions that you can plug into your tenant, you have the flexibility to say, I'd like to try this in a pilot area, and then I'd like to roll it out. So in a nutshell, here's the things that we do around centralized logging, et cetera. There's a whole piece around capacity planning, which I think is fascinating too. We've done some work with a number of education customers, and quite often your on-prem environments may actually be a little over-spec'd. And so this tool can help with that. It's also, it doesn't say it on here, but there is a mobile app for OMS. And so when you think about, I've got a promotion happening this weekend of something going into production, or a change that's going on, maybe it's a network change, and it's a Saturday night. I don't have 24/7 staff. Most school districts and colleges don't. But I want to, I'm responsible for this, so I want to be able to pull up my iPhone or Windows Phone or Android phone and pull up the OMS app to just see how things are going with that change that happened. And so I find that one pretty cool as well. Karen, I'm going to turn this back over to you now because I think you were going to talk through. Excellent.
And I will. So you thought Greg got excited because of his level of caffeine. I'm not going to blame caffeine, but I will say the other reason why we think OMS is such a sweet deal, no pun, all the puns obviously, is that the way it's available for education customers makes it a very economical deal. And I'll walk this through a little bit. You'll have these slides to dig into in more details, and then there'll be a planning worksheet at the end, so we'll walk through that a little bit more at the end. But in essence, the way that OMS is priced is an add-on to System Center. And as an add-on, because your price for System Center is very economical, with the add-on services in OMS are very economical. So let's start with the basics. We have two ways that we can price this. This is based on System Center standard. The pricing here is education pricing. So on your EES agreement, it's about $123 per year for 2 processors of System Center standard. The add-on to OMS is priced per month. So that's the item below. So it's $43 per month or $516 per year. For that, you get all the products that are in that list above. So you get Site Recovery to Azure. So this is Disaster Recovery for 2 virtual machines. And that's the per month price if you were going to buy that service. You get Azure Backup for 2 protected instances or virtual machines. And that would be the price that you would pay for it. So you can clearly, if you do the arithmetic, see that if you were going to look at disaster recovery or backup, that effectively justifies the cost for all of the pieces in the suite. And you get things like the log analytics, which is really that transformational next generation of the management capabilities of the cloud. So you'll see that on our Friday session. And the rest of the pieces, process automation and desired state configuration. So how do we change your management experience? So at the standard level, for about $516 a year if you have System Center, or about $630 if you don't have System Center, you're going to get a package of services that really takes you through all of what we can do to both improve reliability and then also change your operations environment. So Glenn or Greg, if you can go to the next slide, we'll walk through what that looks like from the data center perspective. So we have a System Center data center offering, which is really a richer set of services on premises, and that also gives you richer set of capabilities when you look at OMS. So with data center, it's a $333 per year ERP, and what you get with the OMS add-on lets you protect 10 VMs. With Azure Site Recovery, 10 VMs for Azure Backup, and similarly larger numbers for log analytics, et cetera, et cetera. You get 5 times more than what you got with the standard option. Doesn't cost you 5 times more. So that's another factor that is in your favor across all the board, not only just what costs you for System Center, but what it costs you for the OMS add-on. So again, if you are even just looking at DR, this is going to justify the cost for everything and bring the per unit cost for DR down significantly. So we think it is a great deal for education customers because while cost is always an important factor, this brings this down to a budget level that enables education customers to get really enterprise class services at a good education price, which is really what Microsoft has done consistently. So Greg, next slide. And I did want to mention, everything says confidential in there. It's not confidential. This is public stuff. We can keep going through this one because in the interests of time, a couple of different ways to do that comparison in case you need to do that. There are a couple things that aren't included, and I think that's the next slide. Storage is not included. We'll give you some ways to estimate what storage you need for backup and for site recovery. Storage transactions are not included. They are a small, very, very small, tiny feature in the costing for site recovery. And then outbound data transfer, which is really if you need to recover back to on-premises. So we'll show you how you would estimate at least the storage piece of this. Just know that the rest of these components are relatively small in comparison. So that's the other reason why we're excited about OMS, is that it is enterprise class services at an education price. And now we're going to ask Aidan to really show us the meat here. So if we were going to use this service or take advantage of this pricing, what would we get just from the backup and recovery components? So Aidan, over to you.
Thank you. So let me just take over as presenter. So it's the slide. Okay, so we should be on the OMS Sweet slide there, correct? If someone can confirm.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So the nice thing, like Greg was mentioning, with the OMS Suite, it's not just tied to one set of technology. It's not just tied to specifically Microsoft technology. As you see in the diagram here, it works with your stuff on-prem, so your Hyper-V, VMware, Azure Stack that's coming out, open source content, as well as other cloud providers like AWS and things of that nature. So the stuff that we're going to talk about today is around that disaster recovery and backup scenario to keep your business operational, keep your systems up and running. So with ASR, you can connect it to any type of platform in this regards and have it protect and replicate that content and that data. And as we'll see in an example, in a disaster scenario, we're able to very easily and effectively switch over and bring up the disaster systems that have replicated that data, and then your environment, your business critical systems are up and running in a matter of minutes. So the key point or key takeaway is it's not just Microsoft, it's not just Windows. We're one big happy open family, right? Microsoft loves Linux, and we work with other cloud providers as well to really protect your critical workloads wherever they may reside so that we can keep you operational at all times. So we're going to talk a little bit right now about Site Recovery, which is ASR for short, and Azure Backup, which is just backup. So the first thing to keep in mind with this tool, it actually serves as a dual purpose, but effectively it's replicating your systems from wherever they may be, whether they're in a different cloud provider, whether they're on-prem, even if they're physical, virtual, or VMware. So all three of those types of workloads or environments are supported. You can connect it to a recovery vault, and it will replicate that data and that content to Azure and hold it there waiting in case there's a disaster. So you don't pay for systems that are running in Azure until you flip it over, but it's constantly replicating that data in a controllable manner. You can control how frequently that occurs. I believe it's been updated to now to a minimum of 5 minutes even, so it can be very quick to make sure everything's up and synchronized across your environment. So we're going to get Greg to just flip over to the OMS environment for me, please.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so just loading. I still see the slide presentation. You can present your desktop.
Yeah, I got the little orange box around it. Hopefully you're seeing that in a minute or a few seconds.
Okay, I'm still seeing the presentation. Oh, hang on, it's loading. So just while that loads, so the key or the value around ASR especially is that once you connect all of your systems or your key workloads into this recovery service, you actually can have customized disaster recovery plans. So as an example, let's say you have like a business critical system, a SAP related system for managing students or things to support faculty and so forth. You can control the order that things are failed over, how things are spun up, again, to make it as efficient and effective as possible. So, okay, I see the screen. Thank you, Greg. So let me just request control. If you can just accept that for me. Thank you. So in OMS, like Greg said, some of the key features like Azure Site Recovery and Azure Backup are through the Azure portal and the Azure system itself, the public cloud offering from Microsoft. But in OMS, it actually helps you to visualize and see what's happening with those products or those tool sets. So we have Azure Site Recovery, a solution here that tells you how many jobs maybe have failed in the last 24 hours so that you know in the morning you can go and check and say, oh, well, we've had some failed jobs, then we might not be in the best state. If there was a disaster scenario, you can investigate that to get that back in alignment so that you know that you're in a good position for that. Same thing with Azure Backup. There's nothing visualized on the tile here right now, but it would show you the quantity, the amount of data that you have backed up, so you can see how much you're consuming in Azure and how many systems have successfully been backed up. So again, as a spot check, as a dashboard coming in the morning, seeing how stuff has run over the evening or through the weekend, so that you know as an organization to support your team and your staff that your disaster recovery scenarios are in a healthy state. So we're going to flip over to the classic portal where we can actually dig into part of the maybe it's the other one, part of the ASR offering, just to bring out and point out a couple of key things to draw to your attention around this service. So as we mentioned, we have our recovery vault here, and as we mentioned, that it supports a wide variety of different scenarios around protection. Again, it's not just Microsoft workloads or Windows workloads, Linux, VMware, physical, virtual, and other clouds. So it gives you a lot of guidance if you choose which scenario you're going to want to set up, and the steps in this dashboard or in this primary screen will guide you through the steps that you need to configure things, how you need to get things protected and set up, and walk you through that process. So it's very helpful that way. So let's say we have our recovery vault already configured. The next thing we need to do is create a protection group and add virtual machines into that. And this one, I don't think it has one, but that's okay. Yeah, what happened to the one that we had? Okay, it's okay. We'll work through this. So we'll just flip back to machines. When we create a recovery group, we add the virtual machines, we install the ASR agent on there, so it starts that replication between on-prem or another cloud into the Azure Recovery Vault storage. And once we add the virtual machines or the physical systems into this environment, they'll show up here, and you can more specifically control what they will be like if you have to fail over to Azure. Sorry. So if we had a virtual machine in here, we could go into it, drill into the configuration of that, and let's say you have a 3-tier application on-prem, and you want to configure it and fine-tune that specifically for failing over to Azure. You can control the server name that's applied to that, even the size, so CPU and RAM, to make that match closely to what it is on-prem for performance, as well as assigning a static IP. So let's take the scenario that if you have an environment in Azure, you have a virtual network in Azure, and you have a VPN connection to your on-prem data center. So it's an extension of your data center. By leveraging ASR and replicating your systems at a touch of a button, which I'll demonstrate in a second, you can do a failover, and because you have that VPN connectivity, or whether you're using an express route, then it's an extension to your already existing environment, and your user base, your students and your faculty will still be able to utilize that product and that system with no downtime. So once we've added our systems into our protection group, we can control the replication settings, how frequently we want that replicated. If it's a 3-tier application, we want those type of snapshots across all 3 layers at the same level, so that there's consistency, application level consistency. You don't want to do a recovery on a database where it's out of sync with what the business logic piece thinks is going on, or that web interface, so that you don't want any corruption or issues there.
Aidan,
yes.
There was a discussion I had earlier today with a customer, and I wanted to just ask you a little bit about this. So when you showed the protected items, there was an option to dig into how long a checkpoint would be stored. Can you talk a little bit about how site recovery relates to, say, backup when it comes to recovery points? So you notice it has, you can retain recovery points for a certain amount of time, but how you would compare site recovery with backup for, recovering from a missing file scenario, that kind of thing.
Yep. No, good question. Thank you. Appreciate that. So with Azure Backup, look at Azure Backup like file and folder level restoration. So whether you're backing up on-prem systems or Azure VMs or other providers of virtual machines, and being able to restore that content to that same system. So let's say like the scenario where someone deleted a crucial file, you can do a recovery and restore of that file to that system. But let's say if maybe the system itself, the VM or the system itself died or was deleted and is not recoverable, then what do you do? Well, with Azure Backup, because the content, the data is encrypted and you control the keys around that encryption, you have to have the passphrase key that you specify during the setup to be able to recover that content to another system, so to another VM, for example, to be able to do a restore. With ASR, it's more of a recovery, not necessarily at the file level, but at the system level itself. So in that scenario, let's say someone accidentally deleted a virtual machine in the environment. Well, if you were protecting it with ASR, you can just trigger a failover, and it would spin up a virtual machine in Azure to the latest recovery point that ASR has replicated the data from. Does that help explain it a little bit, or?
Sure, and I think it's going to be an interesting dimension, because for most of our customers, these are they've always had backup and those tools. Now you've got this other very interesting technology, which is all designed around fast spin up. So it's optimized to say, how quickly can I get this server or these servers in my recovery group all up and running very quickly. So it's optimized around that, and then maintaining recovery points back, for a certain amount of time, but we're not going to keep it for, say, months, etc.
Right.
We've got to, we're focused on coming back up, recovering from a couple of different recovery points, but let's get running, versus, hey, it's backup and I may need to go back months. So you've got two options, and so it really gives you more ways to make the right decision around the fast, what's the best way to come back and come up.
Yeah, exactly. So they do. That's why with the whole disaster recovery, business continuity kind of mindset, the two products, even though they're or services, they're separate, but they work hand in hand to cover both spectrums of that scenario for you. So file servers, right? Files are deleted, stuff of that nature, right? Key file and content. Azure Backup links into that to be able to do a quick recovery of the file content level, whereas at the system protection level, system state, key workloads like SharePoint, SQL, Exchange, even SAP and Oracle-related systems, you can do a recovery of the VM, the physical server, the VMware system as a whole, as an entity in itself, versus just at the file folder level. So
I usually like to talk.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Sure.
Karen. I was just going to add a little bit around what I consider planned versus unplanned as well. So I always think about, Calgary and the floods that happened in Calgary, and data center issues with, the school boards, et cetera. And so the flood is coming. You have an opportunity to do a planned failover, and if at that point you actually have a 0 RPO. It actually does a proper flush of everything up into the replica running in Azure, and you can gracefully shut down before the water rises too high in your data center, and then come up live in Azure for the 3 weeks while somebody runs a shop vac through your data center, soaks up all the water, and you stand up some new hardware. So that's the planned side. The unplanned is, oops, someone just hit the, emergency power off button, or, something terrible happened. I've got a double outage, or, whatever it is. And at that point, yeah, I may have, I think Aidan pointed out, as many as a few minutes of RPO, or recovery point objective, but at least I'm up and running in a couple of minutes in my DR site. And there's more to it as well in terms of swinging over, where do employees work in the case of a flood or a fire or this or that, and how do I do some network stuff and things like that. But at least you can sort of say, here's my core workloads.
Yeah. And there's a question.
Of that, there's
Sorry,
a good question. Yeah, please, Aidan. The question was a good one from Ranjit. So how do you set this up from a network perspective?
Yeah, so just for those that maybe are dialing in, so the question is about how the network stack is configured so that users are seamlessly directed to the DR instance that is up, that's created in that DR scenario. So that's an excellent question. If we go over to here, so we don't have a VM in here, unfortunately, but when you add the ASR utility to the agent, to the systems that you want to protect, you actually go into the recovery vault under the protected items, and your VMs would be listed in here in your protection group. Right now it says 0. But within here, you would click on the virtual machine name, and you could configure, this is the IP I want it to have, or it's going to have the same name, right? So that's one piece. But then tying into the DR scenario, that's where the recovery plan comes in. So let's go into one of these as an example, where now that we have our instances, our entities protected in ASR, things are being replicated to Azure so that it's in sync, ready to go. The recovery plan is how you tell Azure Site Recovery how to spin things up and what you need it to do to accomplish that recovery task. So as an example, we see some default stuff in here about shutting down maybe on-prem stuff, failing over, and we have a group here. Actually, we might have one in here. Oh, no. So you must have deleted the VM must have.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah. I have an OMS tenant, and I have DR stuff done on my other tenant, and that are running in the same context here.
Yep.
So
no problem. That's okay, because we're going to fail it over anyways. That's okay. So your VMs, physical VMware, it doesn't matter what it is, would be listed in this recovery plan, and you can control and add different things to this plan. So I'm going to add a group. Maybe I want to add virtual machines to this group. So let's take that 3-tier example again. Maybe there's a couple SQL servers. You want your systems to come up first before your web front end stuff comes up, because then there won't be anything for people to work with if the web's up for the database. So you would put your SQL, your database layer in a group 1, add your middle tier on the group 2, and maybe add a third one for your front end so that it comes up in the right order. And then it also will wait to confirm that those systems are up and running. But also, if I click up here, we can also add into this process scripts. So you can add scripts before or after group failovers. So let's say it does the three node failover of a 3-tier app, and you know the IP it's going to have in Azure because you've set that in the configuration in the recovery of the VM itself. You know the name it's going to have. Let's say it's going to have the same name as on-prem. Well, in that case, you could add a script into here to go and do a DNS update for that name to point to that new IP. And if anyone's familiar with Azure, we see we're in the classic portal right now. There is a preview of the recovery services in the new portal, and once it's fully GA'd, then we'll be able to leverage things like Azure Automation and runbooks and be able to be even further granular and more powerful in our automation around that. Additionally, in the recovery plan, let's say everything fails over, you have a script, it runs and does a DNS update to repoint the name to the new IP. You can also add a manual action into this recovery plan. So let's say you want a human being to actually go and double check, make sure everything is live before you give the green light to management, to CIO, to whomever, saying, yep, we're good, everything's failed over, we're still operational. Maybe 90% of it, 99% of it is automated, but you just want that human touch just to confirm so that you know you're not allowing people to use it when it's not fully up and running. You can add a manual step into this recovery plan, and it will hit that and stop and wait for a human to say, check mark, yes, I've completed this manual step. So you can add a manual step, you can give it a name, you can give it instructions on what to do when this is applying, if we're doing a test failover or if it's a full failover, when it would be applicable or not. And then there would be a prompt for the administrator or whoever's triggering the failover in Azure to say, yes, I've completed this manual step. And then if there was more steps after that, automation and so forth, it would just continue down that plan. Does that answer your question there, Ranjit?
So, Aidan, while we're waiting for Ranjit to make a comment, and thank you for the question, I think that was a healthy way to elaborate on that. One other aspect of site recovery, you mentioned it initially, and it's worth talking about here, is that we now have copies of your production servers effectively replicated in Azure. And one scenario around test failover that is a very positive option is the fact you can now do this for testing.
Yeah,
so
I can
it's sometimes
speak to that.
Please do.
Yeah, so a couple of different things around that. Very good. So let's say you have your business critical system supporting your students and faculty, and there's going to be, release 2.0, maybe there's some patching for the OS or the product, and you're not sure how it's going to react, and you want to kind of confirm it's okay before you push it in production. Maybe you don't have a dev test space to fully test that against. With ASR, because it's replicating the entire environment, all the components, you can trigger a test failover, and what that will do is it will initiate the virtual machines being spun up in Azure just as they were replicated from production. They're up and running, waiting for you to finish your testing, and you can use that platform to test patches, to test code changes to those apps, to make sure it's operational before you push it in production. And when you're done testing, then you say test complete, then Azure will tear down those virtual machines because they're only needed temporarily, and then continue that replication of on-prem into Azure to pick up where it left off. Okay.
Thank you, Aidan. That did a great summary of that. So you now have an environment that replicates your true production environment, which is always difficult to get for testing. I posted in the IM panel a great question from Richard around, hey, what does the recovery experience look like? And while I'll I'll ask Aidan to talk about the recovery to on-premises. I'd also like you to talk a little bit about what about recovery to Azure, because I think those are two very valid options that you want to consider when it comes to recovery from in a disaster situation.
Yeah, so what's nice with the ASR tool, it helps not only in that replication aspect, so you have that fail-safe. And just a quick comment about the whole test failover option. It's really powerful to be able to go to management, CIO, whatever level you need to go to and say, yes, we have effectively confirmed and tested our failover scenario and confirmed our systems operate at a click of a button and within X number of minutes, depending on how complicated your recovery plan is, everything's up and running, right? Which is completely different than saying, well, everything's backed up, it's on tape, it's off site, we need to bring it back on site. It takes X number of days or weeks to get everything back up and running. At a click of a button, you can test your failover plan and confirm saying, yes, quarterly, semi-annually, annually, so forth, your disaster recovery processes can be vetted and tested on a regular basis and give you that confidence that that the solution's working for you and that your organization is in a good state for that. So sorry, Karen, you said there's a question around like recovery into Azure itself.
So you failed over, or your disaster has happened.
Yep.
His question is, so how do I recover back to on-premises?
Right. Okay. From Azure back to on-prem.
Correct. Gotcha. So the scenario is you know, I guess to start with, Richard, it's when you come up, you're going to come up in Azure. So you've accomplished your recovery. You're running in Azure for a point in time. So that's how we get to that very minimal recovery point, or very low recovery point, or a response time, because we can come up in Azure. So you're operational. Then, Aidan, the question is, so now I'm operational in Azure. How do I reverse the flow, and how do I then remigrate to on-premises, and what would that look like?
Yep, very good. Yep. So because the ASR product and service, it can work as a migration tool as well. It works in both of those directions. So let's say we failed everything over to Azure. We built a brand new data center because maybe something blew up and we want to bring it all back. So in ASR, you would label or mark your systems that are running in Azure as, you know, the primary or the main source, and you would recover those to a recovery vault pointing down to on-prem. And once that replication has occurred at that first point, right, for that delta, then you can trigger a failover and pretend it's a full disaster type of failover, and then it will migrate that load down to on-prem and stop replicating data from Azure or from AWS or so forth. So now your instances in your on-prem data center are the only instances running, and that's effectively how it can come back on-prem and migrate back on site.
Perfect. And so to Richard's point, I mean, if it's a lot of data, it will take, you know, those durations can take a little while, and you do have tools that help you manage the flow. So basically determine how much the throughput, you know, how much throughput to allocate to that amount, and or to the flow in both directions. So both I'm replicating from Azure to cloud, or sorry, from on-prem to cloud, and from cloud back to on-premises. So you manage that process
as well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, you manage. Actually, that lets me make a quick comment apropos to this, is that for Azure, we are peered with the research networks across Canada, which means that traffic between you and us will travel on Canary if you're on the broader Canary network, or in your regional instances. And many of you know we're working with our new Canadian data center services in preview. And we certainly had a lot of our customers do their network planning to ensure that the throughput is optimal. And we do see some pretty good throughput when it comes to getting from you folks to us, and obviously vice versa. So which means, back to your point, Richard, the traffic between you and Azure will pass over those research networks if you are on it, versus, say, the public internet by preference. So that should give you that possibility to burst up in a case where you do need to, say, pull back good amounts of data back to on-premises at any point, or really moving up to Azure. I think we do have the ability to, yeah, I think we do have the ability to pre-stage data into the data centers too, do we not, Aidan?
Into Azure? Yeah, so there's some processes around that as far as like potentially shipping content and Microsoft directly importing it physically, like into the environment.
Yeah, we have certainly seen cases where people have a lot of data that's a big backup repository and they don't want to go through the replication process. We do have that, the ability to ingest these things in basically in encrypted drives, just so that you're not waiting for that to come alive.
Yeah, so there's some processes around that. So just briefly to touch on just the backup stuff, because backup is fairly standard, right? There's multiple backup tools that enterprises and organizations and universities and so forth that leverage different types of vendors for that. With the backup vault, one of the nice things about that, like Greg earlier on mentioned, that it replaces the need for tape drives. So instead of having tapes off-site for X number of years, being able to pull that all back if you need to recover something, with Azure Backup Vault, the current time that it can back up things is 99 years. So that's a pretty decent amount of time. I don't know if you need anything beyond 99 years, but it covers common legalities, right, around like maybe lawyer type stuff or key records that are required to be stored for a certain period of time. Azure Backup Vault can be able to obviously handle those key types of requirements. So you can either directly install the Azure Backup agent on a server and again directly send that to Azure, but it also integrates to other products like DPM, System Center Data Protection Manager. If that's already deployed in the environment, it can use DPM can use Azure Backup as a replacement for the tape storage option. But if you don't have DPM, or maybe your environment is not large enough to really get value out of a full-blown DPM installation, Microsoft also has the new Azure Backup Server, which gives you, it's basically DPM Lite. It gives you that functionality, the intelligence around key application workload backup, like Exchange and SharePoint, things of those natures, and gives you disk to disk, so the local storage backup, just like a normal backup product, but then disk to cloud in place of the tape option. And I believe with the Azure Backup Server, it does not require a System Center license. So that's also
correct.
An option.
So
it's also an option. Yeah.
Yeah, Azure Backup Server requires no separate license. DPM is bundled into System Center licensing, and so when we look at the way we price that OMS service, in essence, because of the the add-on to System Center, in essence, you get Azure Backup where it makes sense. If you need to use System DPM to run backups, you have that as an option, and we expect the products will basically merge at some point, but definitely Azure Backup, if you have no System Center licensing and you really need to get good backup services, it is a great option.
Okay. So we have a few minutes left. If we want to flip back to the slides just around planning for ASR and backup, just so that people have an idea of what that would kind of entail.
Sure thing. Actually,
sorry, go ahead, Karen.
And maybe before we move off of that, and yes, if you pull up the slides, that would be great. One interesting scenario for Azure Backup relevant to education is that you can have a server that is really backing up straight to Azure from a specific location. So if you have a remote a remote area, a remote location, or a school with a file share in a school, and you want to run backups rather than having to backhaul that content to your central environment and use that to back up to cloud or back up to your on-premises disk. You can back it up straight to Azure, and you can similarly do that with desktops. So if you have people that are not connected often to your network and you need to be backing up their server or their desktops or even a server if you want to manage that, you can directly back up from those environments straight to Azure, and that's a distinctive capability of Azure Backup.
Thank you, Karen.
So, not at all. So one of the times when we presented this, we did get a question from a contact about, hey, how do we plan for this? So site recovery, very interesting. How would we do this? So I pulled some data out of a customer that I was working with and said, for an example, if we had 84 servers and we had about 9,000 gigabytes of storage, how would we plan for site recovery? So here's some numbers for you to consider. So we're looking at using the add-on pricing for System Center plus the add-on. So that's 9 data center licenses, which gives you protection for 90 servers, both for site recovery and for backup. You estimate the page blob data that you need to store. So that's about 9 terabytes of page blob data, and that's the annual cost for that storage. And so the all-up price for that is in and around $9,500 if you price it using the OMS add-on. We should mention the add-on pricing is available to the end of June, by the way. So what happens after June, we never know. That is the end of our year. But this is the pricing that would be in place between now and the end of June. And obviously you would then add that to your agreement, which would give you the ability to have that going forward. If you were going to price that independently, if you were going to price it just for the per month cost for site recovery and the storage cost, it would be in and around that $60,000. So you can see where that savings come in. You noticed I did not price in things like DR or failover testing or any of the times when you might want to bring up a subsection of those servers to run a test. And you can get some high-level thumbnail pricing using something like the Azure calculator to estimate how much it would cost you to run a test based on really how you expect to be able to do that. Would that be something you would run monthly? Would that be something you would run on a weekly basis, etc.? So those are the high-level planning numbers for site recovery. And if you go on to the second slide, this is a similar set of content around backup. So we price backup the similar way that we price site recovery, which is per managed instance. So we've got 28 servers we want to protect. Actually, I'll notice that there's a little error on here, which I will correct before these things go out. If I was only protecting 28 servers, obviously I would buy a lot less System Center. My assumption here is that you're really going to buy the amount of System Center licensing you need for site recovery, and then effectively everything kind of rides for free when it comes to backup. But maybe there's 2 columns in here for us to think about. But in essence, you would then, at least as a very basic number, estimate the amount of blob storage that you would need to consume with that 3,900 gigabytes of storage. And what I've laid out on the next slide is more of a specific step-by-step calculation, the kind of worksheets we do for storage when we're thinking about data storage with incremental backup data, weekly, with the retentions as follows. So you can do a bit of a few estimates wrapped around that for different retention numbers. And the OneDrive link that I've posted there has the information on where you can access things like the calculators you could pull off and do your own what-if testing based upon your own your own retention limits, and then obviously things like change rates, etc. One of the factors that is always a question mark is what is your compression ratio. I don't know if Aidan can add any comments around that. That is very, very dependent, obviously, on your data. One option might be to run a couple of tests using something like Azure Backup, simply to find out a little bit more about what your compression ratio is and use that to establish a larger set of numbers. It is an interesting model with Azure, where sometimes the easiest thing to do is to kind of run a what if versus gather data, but maybe Aidan has some comments around that.
Yeah, I don't recall what the exact compression rate is, but I believe you're right. It's dependent on what workload, right? So, a SQL database versus just file server, that type of thing. But we can definitely get that information, that right information to people. So.
Agreed. Yeah, we'll add, we will certainly add a couple of links to give you folks some more background and let you give some, get some worksheets to help you do some planning. So plenty of resources for you to evaluate or to understand some of the costing numbers.
So I can take this one.
Please do.
So just as a summary, kind of in closing, this slide mentions some of the other capabilities of OMS and how everything interlinks together. Today we talked about the backup and recovery to really have that non-destructive DR testing scenario to have confidence that your systems, your data is backed up. You can do file and folder level restore, but also that recovery of the physical VM, other clouds, VMware, that type of thing. On Friday, we do, as Lindsay has mentioned, we have our second in this webcast series. We're going to talk about that log analytics and the business intelligence, what you get out of OMS, which is very powerful. But perhaps maybe at a future date, we'll have other events around some of the IT automation. I think we touch on that a little bit on Friday as well. And security and compliance, I think we touch briefly on Friday further on that too. So the key takeaway to this is OMS is kind of like a living, breathing thing. It constantly is updated and modified and enhanced quite frequently. You'll notice if you go into the solutions gallery, some stuff are labeled as coming soon. Eventually there'll be public GA, and then new stuff will be added in the future as well. So it's a very powerful product to really give you that single environment or single pane of glass to be able to see what's going on across all the different activities that you're managing within your environments, from backup and DR to issues in the environment and patching and so forth. So it's quite a powerful tool that can be leveraged either independently on its own or augment and really supplement and enhance system center deployments that are currently in your environment today.
That's great, Aidan. So thank you for taking us through at least an intro to OMS, our first phase. So with that, please, if people have any questions, we will be happy to take more questions. We'll certainly, I'll post my email address if anybody wants to get in touch with me and ask more questions.
Thanks very much. It's Richard here. Just thanks to everyone. It was a great presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining, Richard. It is